In this video, we will show you how to replace your front wheel bearing on this 2009 Dodge Dakota. This will be located directly behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts and then the wheel. If you have a dust cover, remove that as well. Next, we're going to move along to removing the caliper from this area. Now we can start removing the caliper. You'll notice for this, you have 2 21mm bolts holding it in place. We'll loosen the top one, leave it in there a couple threads, fully remove the lower one. Inspect all of your hardware as you remove it, replace it as necessary. Now we'll start removing the caliper. When you do, it's important to make sure that you hang it on something so it's putting no pressure on the flex hose. There we are. Now that we've hung our caliper aside, making sure we're putting no pressure on the flex hose, go ahead and remove your brake rotor. We'll set this aside. Use a 36mm socket to remove your axle nut. Continue with a hammer and punch. Come right in the center of the axle shaft here. We're going to break the axle free from the wheel bearing. Once you've got some movement from there, continue on. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, let's go ahead and follow our ABS wire coming up the control arm and then all the way up to the wheel well. You can see that you have the tip of the push clip coming through. Use a trim tool and come from the back side of the wheel well here and pry up against the ABS wire. We're going to try to pull this right out of here. Once you have that down, you can bring it down to an area that you can service this. Looking at this area, you can tell that there's a little tab that we can squeeze in and then gently pull this apart. Once we do, we'll give it a quick check for corrosion. This one looks fine. Let's follow the wire down to the upper control arm. For this, you'll find that your wheel bearing came with a brand new bracket here. So to remove the bracket from the control arm, there's a tab that you can come under here, press on with a small screwdriver, and release it. Continue following that wire down to where it mounts to the knuckle. For this, we'll use our trim tool and gently pry it out of place. Now it's time to start dismounting the wheel bearing from the steering knuckle. Looking along the back, you're going to find that you have 3 21mm bolts that make its way through the knuckle directly into the bearing. We'll remove all 3. Inspect the hardware as you remove it. Replace it as necessary. Move along to the top bolt. To access the forward bolt, you might have to turn the steering wheel towards the driver's side. Now it's time to separate the bearing from the knuckle. To do that, we'll use a hammer. We're going to give this a couple loving bonks, up and down, left and right, trying to break it free. Before we do that, let's take the axle nut and we're going to start it on here just a couple threads for safety. Remove your axle nut. Remove the bearing. As you pull this off, you'll find that the backing plate comes off with it. That's okay. Slide this right out of there. There it is, friends. Now, once you have the bearing out of there, it's important to make sure you clean up all of the mating surfaces. You'll find that you have the flat area along the outer aspect of the knuckle, but you also have this inner area of the circle to make sure you pay attention to as well. Once we have that cleaned up, we'll make sure that we clean and inspect the splines on the axle. Continue to the mating surfaces on both sides of the backing plate. You can see exactly where the bearing and the knuckle ride. Once you have both sides of that cleaned, continue on to cleaning the threads on all three of your wheel bearing mounting bolts. Once you have all three of those cleaned up, we'll continue with some copper never sees. It's a good idea to coat a little bit along the inner aspect here. We'll get along the very edge and some on the axle splines. Now we can prepare to put on the wheel bearing and our backing plate. We'll take the ABS wire and slide it right on through that center hole. Once you've done that, you're going to pay attention to the back side of the bearing. Look for the ABS wire. We want to make sure that that lines up with the corresponding slot. Now we can take this entire thing, we're going to put the axle through the back side of the bearing while putting it in place. Be extremely careful for your ABS wire as you do so. Line up all three of your mounting bolt holes and start them in. Just move everything around as needed to get it lined up. That one started, let's move along to the top. Now we can get this bottom corner. After you have all three mounting bolts started, go ahead and snug them up. Once you have those snug, torque each of them to 120 foot-pounds. Let's start resecuring the ABS wire. For this, you want to bring it behind the knuckle, swing it around, and start putting it in and through this hole along the backside. Press that right in. Make sure that's secure. Bring this up and over the control arm to put it into its original position up along here. Lock it in. Bring this down. If you have trouble squeezing it, just use some pliers. Reconnect the electrical connector. Listen for a click from that. Give it a little tug to make sure that the connector is secured. Now we'll bring this from the inside of the wheel well and start pushing it out through this mounting hole. Let's apply some copper never sees to the mating surface of the bearing. Once we've done that, we'll continue on to cleaning the backside of our brake rotor. When you clean this, you want to make sure it's as smooth as possible. With that clean, let's go ahead and reinstall it onto the wheel bearing. Hold that in place with one of your lug nuts and a spacer. Let's move along to the brake caliper. We'll slide it in position over the rotor, align our two mounting bolt holes, and start in each of those 21mm headed bolts. Now we can snug them up and torque them to 130 foot-pounds. Now it's time to reinstall the axle nut. You'll notice that I'm a lot closer to the ground for this, because as we start to tighten this, you'll find that this wants to spin on you. The reason why we're close to the ground is because you can use a long pry bar, carefully get in between your studs, making sure that you're not going to damage them anyway, and that'll hold this still while you continue. We'll put on the axle nut, start it on there by hand and snug it up. Once you have it snugged by hand, go ahead and torque it to 185 foot-pounds. Let's remove the lug nut and the spacer from this area. Let's get our wheel on here. Start on all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts, bottom them out. Once you have those snug, get the wheel safely back down on the ground. We'll continue on to torquing each of the lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, we've got the truck back together. At this point, go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment, pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Take your vehicle for a road test, make sure you don't have an ABS light and no funny noises. After that, go ahead and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.